Okay, this week I'm delighted to be joined by Matteo Deidda, Global Net Zero Lead at Tide, a fintech platform that provides financial and business services to more than 1.5 million small businesses worldwide. Welcome to the podcast, Matteo.
Hi, Gareth, and thank you for having me today.
We've got plenty to get stuck into, but I like to start off always by asking, how did you first get started in sustainability?
Oh, yes. And so, look, as you can guess from my name and accent, I am originally Italian, and I started to get interested about sustainability and specifically energy efficiency during my engineering degree. So I studied civil engineering at university, and there was always an angle about the energy efficiency of the buildings that sort of we were working on. And then after I finished my studies, I actually decided to start a master degree in renewable energies and energy efficiency. So that was really when I started to get very much into this career path. I studied my master's in Spain, and it was at the time of the economic crisis in Spain. So after I finished my master's, I then came to the UK, and I started to work in sustainability, initially for Sainsbury's, their energy and sustainability team. I've been there for 5 years, and that was lots of fun because I think like in the UK, retailers are quite advanced from an energy efficiency perspective because it's so competitive in the UK and margins are so low that there was lots of investment on sort of energy efficiency back then. And then I spent a couple of years at Vodafone working on the network side of things, so data centers and so on. And then I moved to Lloyds Banking Group, where I spent another 5 years, and I started to get more involved into broader net zero conversations, so also business travel, commuting, waste, water, and so on. And then finally, in February this year, I've joined Tide on a very different challenge.
Right. Yes, indeed. It does seem quite, well, you can see the progression, but quite different, retail, networks and IT, the digital economy, and then onto banking. But I suppose you're currently in a mixture of banking and digital.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. Also, my role has evolved over time. I started more focus on energy and energy management, and I think 15 years ago I used to talk a lot more about the kilowatt hour and pounds, while today I talk a lot more about carbon emission and still pounds, but less about kilowatt hours.
Yes, indeed. So Tide has 3 net zero pledges. Can you talk us through those?
Yeah, definitely. And so when I joined, I should probably say that when I joined Tide in February this year, I was the first person that sort of joined the company, which was only focused on sustainability, which I think is a bit of a pivotal moment in the sustainability strategy of any organization when they start to bring someone on board that will work only on sustainability. But when I joined, the team at Tide has already done lots of work to actually put together a net zero plan. Lots of people were very interested in sustainability at the exec level and at the leadership level. So they worked before my time on a net zero plan, which is made of basically 3 pledges. Then the first one is about carbon removal. So at Tide, we purchase 100% carbon removals to cover our scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions, and we've been doing this since 2022, and we keep doing this every year. The second pledge is about reduction, and it's an intensity reduction target, so 90% reduction of CO2 emission per employee versus a 2021 baseline. We're a growing organization, and so an intensity-based target makes more sense rather than an absolute target. And the third target is about supporting our members on their journey towards net zero. As you said in the introduction, we've got 1.5 million members across the UK, Germany, and India. We know that SMEs play a key part on the journey toward net zero, and so we have an opportunity to help them reducing their carbon emission in a way that makes sense for them. So, from a time and money perspective.
Yes. And do those members, do they come under your scope 3, or is your scope 3 focused on the more traditional supply chain side of things?
Our scope 3 focus more on the supply chain side.
Yeah. And the first thing that struck me about this was that you pledged carbon removal as pledge 1, and then net zero as pledge 2. It's an interesting juxtaposition because most people do it the other way around. Is there a purpose behind that?
I think there isn't really any hidden message into that. I think all the pledges carry the same weight and the same importance, of course. I guess probably from a time perspective, purchasing carbon removals was something that at Tide we could start immediately. And that has been a bit of the position that sort of we took about carbon removal. We see it, and I see it as really something that can start right here and right now. Really, the decarbonization element takes time, like projects and processes takes time to change. So clearly, we cannot reduce 90% of emission per employee overnight, but we could actually start to purchase carbon removal within a reasonable amount of time. And that perhaps the reason why it comes first in the order. So it's certainly not an importance element, but it probably flags the fact that it's something that can start right here and right now.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. And we'll dig into the carbon removal side in a minute. The other question I had is, you said 90% of carbon emissions per employee, but, I pulled off the website 97% of emissions by revenue. And I've been trying to work out the maths of that in my head, of the difference between the 90% target and the 97% target, why they may differ.
I think this links back to when the target was set. I think our emission is very much linked to the number of employees that we have, and the fact that we are a growing organization. It means that we needed to have that sort of physical intensity metric, but also looking at the previous version of the SBTi guidance, then it talked about the financial intensity metric. So we feel that we needed to have one for the revenue, but the reality is that our emissions are more linked to the employees, and that's why we had both of them. At the moment, we probably clearly there are some information from a financial perspective we don't disclose publicly, and then the employee element it's easier then to track and also put outside.
Yeah, I suspected that if you got 97% per revenue, that it would be very likely that you would get 90% per employee, probably more. Yeah. So obviously, as we said, carbon removals play a major role in those pledges. Can we start by defining carbon removals?
Look, I think, I'm sure there are lots of very formal definitions out there, but I guess from a perspective, trying to keep things relatively simple, we see carbon removal as a process or project that extract CO2 from the atmosphere and it stores it somewhere for a long period of time, usually decades, hundreds or thousands of years. I think for those that are not so close to the carbon removal market, there is perhaps some sort of confusion between removal and avoidance, which is probably one of the first distinction with the carbon market. Clearly, when we talk about removals, we're saying that at some point there is one element of CO2 in the atmosphere. You do something, and then the other equation, there is no CO2. While the avoidance element, it's projects that avoid more carbon coming into the atmosphere. So from an avoidance perspective, there is one element of CO2 in the atmosphere. you do something, and at the end of it, there is still one element of CO2 in the atmosphere. So we focus only on carbon removal, so we don't really purchase carbon avoidance as such.
Yeah, and the approaches you can use go from tree planting at a sort of very basic level and a cheap level up to technologies like direct air capture, which is very expensive. Where do you sit as Tide on in terms of what technologies you you'd like to use?
Yeah. So look, I mean, on the CDR technology map, there is quite a lot of options on the menu, and I think like a relatively simple categorization is about sort of nature-based solution, and under the nature-based solution, you get things like afforestation and reforestation, so planting specific kind of trees in areas where there were not trees before, or where trees have been lost. But then you also get other elements under the nature-based solution. So you get blue carbon management, so mangroves. You get soil carbon capture, so type of regenerative agriculture. So there is like lots of different technologies under this nature-based solution. And then you got something probably in the middle, which are kind of hybrid solution. And hybrid solution are, let's say, like part technology based and part nature based. So, for example, biochar is this one which is quite popular, which I'll come back in a second. But biochar is basically collecting waste, wood or agriculture waste, and then go through a process of pyrolysis, which is basically burning this wood at a really high temperature without oxygen. And then the result is basically this biochar, which captures the vast majority of the CO2 on the process, and then it can be used for soil enrichment, for example. And then you've got the technology side of the carbon removal spectrum, which is things like bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, which is basically biomass producing electricity, and then the CO2 that is produced on the process gets stored in geological formation underground, for example, or direct air capture, which is like massive installation that we're probably seeing some picture of them in Canada or Iceland, where you suck CO2 out of the atmosphere. So these are the main groups. And then each of these group has also got a different technology readiness level. So not all of the technology sort of are at the same maturity on the spectrum. Clearly, planting trees and the nature-based solution, or some of the nature-based solution, are very mature. We know how to do it. We know how to measure it, etc., etc. Direct air capture is less developed, and there is more investment needed, etc., etc. From a Tide perspective, we have been focusing so far only on biochar. And we're focusing mainly on biochar because from a technology readiness level, it's quite mature. So it's almost like as mature as it can be. The price point is reasonable compared to some of the technology based solution. Is certainly more expensive than nature-based solution. And it's more mature as well from a tracking perspective. So from a measurement and verification, there are lots of models out there that allows to measure the carbon that has been removed with this method. So biochar has been so far the technology that we've been using, but we may be looking at different technologies in the future as well.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And how, all of these technologies have their detractors. And some of it seems to be ideological. There are people who, on one hand, say we must plant trees, and then on the other hand say, no, if you plant trees for offsetting, it could actually increase emissions. So some of it seems to be slightly incoherent. But how do you? I was going to say ensure, but we can never be 100% sure. But how do you get reassurance that carbon is actually being stored? in the soil via biochar?
Yeah, so I think so a few things. First of all, you're absolutely right. All of these technologies have got different characteristics. So we cannot really talk about all of them as if they are the same things. I mean, direct air capture and nature-based solution are just completely different. Like they are managed in completely different ways, a completely different type of expertise, and so on. But also, they deliver very different output in different ways. So, and I think that is an important thing that we sort of should reflect upon, because when we talk about carbon removals, they're not all the same. They bring different things to the table. So, for example, direct air capture or BECCS, which is the bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, have got a very high durability. So once the carbon has been stored and has been pumped underground in geological formation, that's a bit of the end of the story. It's going to stay there for thousands of years. There is very little risk of this carbon to surface again. If you're investing in nature-based solution and tree planting, then those trees are not going to be there for thousands of years. At some point, there is going to be some durability consideration that needs to be taken. But on the other side, those projects will bring in lots of other co-benefits that others don't. So, for example, there could be biodiversity, there could be community benefits. So there is a lot more that comes in with those. So these are different technologies that brings in different elements. In terms of how in terms of the element about how do you actually make sure that these technologies are working and is not just just like some greenwashing on the other side of the planet, which I guess is one of the critics that carbon removals often get. I think in my experience, what I have seen is that the carbon removal industry have suffered so much from mistrust from organizations that has reacted by producing a huge amount of standards and models and techniques to measure the output of the carbon removal, so which is incredible. In fact, one of the difficulties that I find is when talk about projects and marketplace and providers in this space is that there is like so much details about the projects to really build that confidence that sometimes it's hard to navigate because they are like very, very specific, and there are like so many third party and certifications and so on. So I think from a Tide perspective, what we do is we buy biochar from one of the largest installations in the world. So it's a very well-known name. They've been around for a long time, and we also work with a third party to source and vet the project. They use hundreds of data points. There is a third party MRV, and this is listed on one of the largest register of carbon removals. There are so many layers of control that it really feels a safe investment and a secure investment. Clearly, the challenge comes if you want to buy very cheap carbon removals and you also want the safe investment. Clearly, the more secure, the more robust, and the more measured it is, the more the carbon removals are going to cost, clearly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting you've gone to that sort of mid level removals option because in price terms, because one of the arguments against tree planting is it's too cheap, is you can sort of throw a few pounds, dollars, euros at somebody and say go and plant a lot of trees. But does going for a more expensive form of carbon removal, does that drive pledge to the net zero drive? Because obviously the more you reduce your emissions, the less you have to spend on removals.
I mean, we may not call it that way, but purchasing or pledging to purchase carbon removals de facto introduce an internal carbon price within the organization, because then everything we do, like a new supplier, like a different travel policy, a different product that drives more energy consumption in data centers, whatever. All of these things have got a price, a carbon price tag attached to it. So I think that internally it's a very clear way to introduce that accountability at different levels and to put a price on what the carbon emissions are. So I think that from the perspective, it's certainly a solid instrument. But also, look, I mean, at Tide, we have decided to focus on biochar so far because that was what we felt was right for us. But also, from a nature-based solution, there are like some fantastic projects out there, and some of them deliver like a huge amount of co-benefits from a biodiversity perspective, a local community, which are amazing. And the carbon may not be stored for 1,000 years, but there is still lots of value on them. So generally speaking, Gareth, I'm a big advocate that if there is an opportunity to do more, then organization should do more. And so if there is an opportunity to invest on some of these projects, as well as focusing heavily on decarbonization, then that's something else organization can do. And so they do what they can do, really.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm interested in the biodiversity and community co-benefits. Can you give any insight on how the projects you invest in deliver those?
I mean, like the biochar, for example, the biochar is reused by local farmers because it improves and enrich the soil where it is spread. So, like the biochar in itself is something that farmers would otherwise probably buy and put on the soil anyways. But another example is projects in India where biochar is very popular. There is like a big challenge in some parts of India where agricultural waste is burned at the end of the season, and it produces even more CO2, it produces pollution, it produces smokes, etc., etc. Whenever these waste, agricultural waste, can actually be introduced in a biochar production regime, either a big facility like the one that we use in Bolivia, or like artisanal biochar, that is a big community benefit because it's taking away all that pollution and all that all that CO2 happening. So these are some of the examples, really, but also lots of producer of carbon credits are often farmers, small projects owners. So these just produce an extra level of revenue for them. That's why I say that nature-based solution and probably biochar, they add additional co-benefits that probably you don't get with direct air capture or BECCS. On the other side, those projects deliver much longer term removals than the former. So each technology it has got its own benefit, and there isn't just one that is right for every organization. It's very much depends on what is important for you. If you are really focused on durability, then you're going to focus on some of the technology based. Yeah. If you want immediate carbon removals that are not going to last 1,000 years, perhaps they're going to last 50, but you also want to add it to the local community, then nature-based solutions are a great alternative. So there isn't just a one solution fit all.
Fantastic, thanks. Going back to Pledge 2, then, what are the big issues, decarbonisation issues for a fintech platform?
Yeah, so I think so from a Tide perspective, we are. Our carbon footprint is relatively small compared to some other organizations. So we're around 5,000 tons of CO2. We've got a relatively small office presence, but we occupy offices which are quite high spec and just sustainable by design. And then one of the first things that clearly we did was putting in place a renewable energy procurement strategy. So we purchase, we either receive renewable electricity throughout the supply of our office where we are a tenant on multi-tenants building, or we purchase renewable energy certificates ourselves for the energy that isn't covered already by our landlord. And we're also a remote first organization, so most of Tidans have the opportunity to work remotely, which clearly helps. And we've also got a well-established travel policy. So if Tidans travel to some of the other location, then there is a requirement to spend a certain amount of time there. So you cannot just hop on a plane and fly from London to India for 2 days. So you need to stay there for like 2 weeks. So we're quite good at managing that business travel, the commuting element, and the renewable electricity and energy supply element. Now, what we're left with now is pretty much supply chain emissions. So around 80% of our emissions come from our suppliers. So this year, we're focusing on bringing in a carbon calculation platform to help us becoming more sophisticated on the calculation, understanding which one of our suppliers are driving most of our supply chain emissions. So with the intent then to start the engagement and understanding which products and so on. So the focus is going to be definitely on the supply chain side, probably for the next 24 months.
Yeah. And I realize I'm probably asking these questions in reverse order rather than the one I should do. But what's the driver behind these pledges from a fintech company? Is it, the ethos of the founders? Is it coming from the marketplace? Is it coming from employees? What would you say the pressures on Tide to pursue what is a very ambitious goal of net zero by 2030?
So I think I think it's different. It's probably different elements. There was certainly, and there is certainly a push from the exec, our CEO, the India CEO, the CFO. They're all very committed to sort of our pledges and to our net zero journey. And the former CFO was certainly a big advocate for this. So I think that a lot of the conversation started from that exec level, and that ambition started from the exec level. But also, I think that there is really a consideration on the fact that SMEs really play a key part on this journey, and they are often at the end of sort of the journey when it comes to data request, when it comes to legislation, when it comes to what documents they need to provide if they want to bid for a public contract, and so. Because our members are only SMEs, we recognize that this is important to them, or it is going to be very important to them. So to really be able to support them, we certainly need to walk the talk first. So I think it is a double element, and certainly the fact that our members are going to be subject to these, if they're not already, then it's a big push for it as well.
Yeah. And that pledge 3, how does it manifest itself in practice in terms of, is it providing that data that you're talking about on your services, or is it more proactive and actually going out and, reaching out, rather than going out and helping them deliver their, a wider net zero program?
Yeah, so on the third pledge, we're really starting to build that sort of part of the Tide proposition. But one thing that we launched just the back end of 2024 is that now all Tide members in the UK have got access to a carbon calculator, which links back to the transactions that have done through the Tide account, and it's free to use. And we've partnered with a company called Connect Earth, which basically helps us calculating the carbon emission associated with the transaction. So if a member spends £100 we recognize on at the pump station, we recognize that has been spent on fuel, and then there are a number of assumptions plus information that we already have that then produce an output which is carbon emission related, and then we can provide a pie chart to show what the carbon footprint of that company, of that member is. And that is the starting point, though. So what we are really working on or planning on now is what happened next. So once our members know the numbers, then how can we help them reducing that number? And we're also very active in terms of the ecosystem that operates, especially in the UK. So we're parting of Banking for Net Zero and Perseus, which are two initiatives which are really working hard to trying to simplify the journey of SMEs and how they navigate net zero. So Perseus specifically looks at how smart meter data can be used to be shared with financial institutions to unlock finance product. And then Before and Z have just launched a new standard for SMEs data reporting, so that SMEs are not asked by larger customers 20 different data points in 20 different formats, but there is a level of standardization. So at Tide, we see the impact that we have got as a direct in terms of the product, but also as a bigger advocate for SMEs and net zero.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned Bankers for Net Zero, because I'm sure you're aware the press has all been about some big names leaving Bankers for Net Zero. Maybe you do or don't want to comment on that specifically, but where do you see, given some of that noise, where do you see the sort of banking finance sector going on net zero? Is that just noise, or is that a worrying trend?
So I think the noise has been more around the Net Zero Banking Alliance, and rather than Before and Z. Before and Z sort of covers very specific, pragmatic topics, and in terms of the NZBA and the fact that some financial institution has been sort of leaving, I guess that's quite a complex topic. It's hard to say what is happening behind the scene, but what I can certainly see, also with my experience at Lloyds Banking Group before joining Tide, is that lots of the net zero target and lots of the activities happening around net zero in large financial institutions are now written into the books, written into the risk metrics, written into the internal KPIs for the organization. So I think we need to be mindful that perhaps some of these signals that we see on the front page of media are not necessarily reflective of what is actually happening within the organizations.
Yeah. Apologies, you're absolutely right. I mixed up the two organizations, and we had Heather Buchanan for Bankers for Net Zero on the podcast last year. And if she's listening to this, she's probably screaming at me. So apologies to Bankers for Net Zero, I'm sure.
But Before and Z and Heather and her team do a fantastic work on very pragmatic topics, and certainly they've got lots of very passionate members as the Tide.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So looking forward then, what do you see as the way that that sort of fintech and net zero are going to evolve?
So I think from my perspective, it feels like that we are at the beginning of the journey. Mm-hmm. So certainly, I'll probably say Tide is we are relatively advanced as a fintech from a net zero perspective. Clearly, we've got some pledges. We've been doing this now for a couple of years. We are at the forefront of the carbon removal element. We've got reduction target. So we are certainly certainly more advanced than some of the other fintechs. I do understand that for a fintech or startups in general, that they are focusing on scaling up and just like growing. Sustainability doesn't necessarily come as the first thing on the to-do list. But I do really believe that the net zero element brings in lots of business opportunity for organization like Tide, and also helps mitigating risks. And I think that is really what I think will come next. The fact that net zero will become a bit of a business as usual for organization like us, because it just makes good business sense for us and for our members. I think I've been saying this every year since I work in sustainability, but I think like data will become more and more important. But now with AI, even more, certainly an opportunity to develop more and faster. And so I think that is certainly one of the things that we'll be looking at in the next in the next future. And then I'm really looking forward to start to work with our supply chain, because that is going to really unlock carbon reduction from a Tide perspective.
Fantastic. And then sort of circling back to my first question about where you got started, if you, and this is a bit of a, this is your life type question, but if you could go back to the young Matteo setting off in your career, what advice would you give yourself, or to somebody else coming in, say you were moving on to another job and briefing your replacement, what would your advice to them be?
I'll probably say make some friends, because sustainability can be, well, it's a hard job. It's hard to keep up with everything is happening. It's becoming even harder because some of the stuff that we work on is started to become a little bit more involved into politics, and sometimes you may be the only person in the organization, and overall is a shared effort. So you need to bring people on board. So of course you need to know your technical stuff, but you really need to be good at making friends, in the sense of bringing people on board, making it interesting, making it exciting, connect with peers in other organization, because otherwise it's just like too much to take in just for one person without that support network.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. And just leaves me to thank you for joining us today, Matteo. That's been absolutely fascinating. So thank you.
Thank you for having me, and hope to see you soon.
Just thanks.